He thought the desert was silent, until the wind carried a scream that changed his life forever. Arizona Territory. June 14, 1878. The sun bled across the red cliffs of San Pedro Valley, painting the desert in shades of fire and dust. The wind carried the lonely song of the coyotes as it brushed against an old ranch house standing miles from any road. Inside lived Ethan Cole, a 32-year-old rancher whose eyes told stories of battles fought and family lost. His life had become a quiet war against memories that refused to die. Every evening he sat on his porch, staring into the endless horizon, waiting for something, though he didn't know what anymore. That night the air felt heavier, the silence sharper. His horse snorted nervously, sensing what Ethan couldn't yet see. Somewhere beyond those cliffs, fate was stirring, whispering his name. Before the sun would rise again, Ethan's solitude would shatter, and the desert would reveal a truth darker than any night he'd ever known. The wind grew colder as Ethan tightened the reins and rode toward the canyon, the fading light stretching long shadows across the valley floor. His horse's hooves echoed against the dry earth, each thud pulling him deeper into a silence that felt wrong, unnatural. The smell of iron hung in the air, faint but sharp, carried by the wind like a warning. Ethan's eyes narrowed when he spotted black dots circling above the distant oak tree. Vultures, too many to ignore. He urged his horse forward, heart thudding in his chest, the saddle creaking beneath him. As he drew closer, the world seemed to hold its breath. The desert around him stopped moving, and even the wind paused. Then he saw her. A young Apache girl hung from the thick branch, her dark hair tangled in the wind, her feet swaying gently above the sand. She couldn't have been older than 18. The sight hit him like a bullet to the chest. His breath caught, and for a moment he just sat there, frozen between disbelief and sorrow. The setting sun painted her still face gold, almost peaceful, but the message carved into the wooden sign beneath her feet tore through any calm that might have remained. "White man, don't forgive." The words swung in rhythm with her motion, creaking softly, as if whispering a curse meant for every man who dared look upon it. Ethan dismounted slowly, his boots sinking into the dust. The ground felt heavy, the air heavier. He looked around, scanning for footprints, for any sign of who could have done this. Nothing but wind and silence answered back. His horse snorted behind him, restless, sensing danger that his human heart couldn't yet name. Ethan reached for the rope, his hands trembling. He didn't know why, but something inside him refused to leave her hanging there, nameless and alone. The rough fibers cut into his palms as he loosened the knot and lowered her gently to the ground. Her skin was cold, her dress torn, the patterns faded by dust and blood. She looked fragile, almost like she was sleeping. Kneeling beside her, Ethan felt a sharp sting of guilt, though he didn't understand why. Maybe it was because he'd seen too much of this land's cruelty and done too little to stop it. As he brushed the dirt from her hand, something small slipped free. A bracelet, woven from animal hair and tiny blue beads. His gaze locked on the design stitched into it, his initials, E.C., woven in faded thread. For a moment, the world spun around him, his breath shallow. That bracelet had belonged to his wife, Sarah, lost years ago when their wagon was attacked near the border. He'd buried the memory of that day, but now it had come back, hanging before him in the form of this girl he never knew. The wind rose suddenly, howling through the canyon like a warning cry. Ethan stood, his mind burning with questions he didn't have answers to. Who was this girl, and why did she have Sarah's bracelet? His eyes went to the tree again, to the sign swaying like a ghostly voice repeating its message, "White man, don't forgive." For the first time in years, Ethan felt fear crawl beneath his skin, not for what he saw, but for what it meant. Somewhere out there, buried in the red dust of Arizona, a secret waited for him, and he knew the desert was not done speaking yet. Ethan stood frozen in the fading light, his pulse loud in his ears as the dry wind whispered through the canyon. The small bracelet lay in his palm, rough and worn but unmistakably familiar, the faded blue beads glinting faintly in the dying sun. His initials, E.C., stitched into the fragile weave like a ghost from another life. He swallowed hard, his throat dry as dust, the memory of his wife Sarah flickering in his mind like a flame that refused to die. That bracelet had been hers, a gift she'd cherished before the night everything was taken. He had buried her memory deep, but now the desert had dug it up in the cold hand of a stranger. He looked down at the girl's still face, her dark lashes brushing her cheeks, her expression peaceful yet filled with silent questions he could not answer. Why would an Apache girl carry something that belonged to his wife? The thought crawled through his mind like smoke. Impossible to hold, impossible to ignore. He searched her dress pockets gently and with care, finding nothing but a folded scrap of deerskin with strange symbols burned into it, marks of a tribe he didn't recognize. His heart beat faster as he turned it over, seeing a faint image drawn in ash, a mountain split in two, and a river winding between. He had seen that place before, far north near the old trade pass, the same path where his wife's wagon had vanished years ago. A chill ran through him as the pieces began to align in his mind like fragments of a nightmare resurfacing. The air around him grew heavy, as though the desert itself was holding its breath. The wind moaned through the oak branches, carrying the faint echo of something human, a sound too soft to name but too close to ignore. He looked around sharply, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle strapped to his saddle. The horizon was empty, yet he could feel eyes on him, unseen, waiting. The bracelet trembled in his grip, as if it too sensed the weight of what it carried. Ethan knelt beside the girl again, his voice rough when he whispered, "Who were you?" The canyon swallowed his words. He tucked the bracelet into his pocket, feeling the sting of memory cutting deep. It was no longer just about her. It was about everything he had lost, everything that still haunted this land. The sign above the tree creaked again in the restless wind, the words, "White man don't forgive," swinging like a cruel reminder. But forgiveness was the last thing Ethan sought now. He felt something else rising inside him, an ache, a pull, the need to know the truth. Mounting his horse, he cast one last look at the girl beneath the oak, her body now resting in the shadow of the cliffs. Somewhere out there, beyond the red horizon, was a reason, and Ethan Cole was done running from ghosts. He would find who she was, and why the desert had brought her to him. The moon rose pale and hollow above the canyon as Ethan guided his horse through the cold silence, the bracelet's weight in his pocket pressing against his heart like a promise he didn't understand. The ground ahead was scarred with marks half buried in dust, hoofprints, boot tracks, and the faint outlines of moccasins, their patterns scattered but deliberate, leading toward the dry gulch that cut through the valley like a wound. He dismounted, crouching low, his fingers brushing the sand where the earth told its quiet story. There had been a struggle here not long ago. He could see the deep scuff of boots dragging, the faint streak of blood mixed with dirt, and a rifle broken clean in half, its wood splintered and charred at the edges. Something inside him tightened. This wasn't a random killing. Someone had wanted the girl dead and had wanted her message seen. The wind rose suddenly, carrying a long, hollow sound through the cliffs that made his skin crawl. His horse shifted uneasily, snorting into the darkness. Ethan's eyes scanned the rocks, their jagged silhouettes flickering in the moonlight like sleeping beasts. Every instinct screamed that he wasn't alone. He could feel it, the weight of another presence somewhere beyond the ridge, silent, watching. He drew his revolver slowly, the metal cold in his grip. The desert was never truly quiet. It breathed in whispers, in the rustle of dry weeds, in the soft slide of sand underfoot. But this silence felt alive, aware. A faint crunch broke through it, a step, quick and deliberate, echoing off the canyon wall. Ethan turned toward the sound, his breath steady but his pulse wild. Nothing moved, only shadows stretched long against the rocks, but one seemed too sharp, too human to belong there. He took a cautious step forward, his boots sinking into the loose soil, eyes fixed on the ridge. The wind shifted again, bringing with it the faint scent of smoke and sweat, the unmistakable trace of men. Not Apaches, white men. His heart pounded harder. He could almost see their shapes now, ghosting between boulders, keeping their distance, maybe 2 or 3 of them. He knew their kind, ranch riders, hired guns, the kind that drank hard and hated harder. Men like those had burned entire villages and called it justice. He lowered his gaze to the broken rifle again. The metal bore the mark of the Silver Creek brand, a ranch far west of town run by men who never asked questions before pulling a trigger. His stomach twisted with the realization. Maybe the message hanging from that tree wasn't left by Apaches at all. Maybe it was meant to hide something worse. A dry branch snapped somewhere behind him, sharp and close. He spun, gun raised, eyes cutting through the dark, but saw nothing, only the trembling of shadows in the moonlight. For a long moment he stood still, listening, waiting. Then the whisper came again, soft and low, carried by the wind. A voice, distant yet near, calling his name like it had always known him. The desert held its breath once more, and Ethan understood that whatever truth he was chasing wasn't buried in the past anymore. It was walking right beside him. Dawn crept over the desert like a fading wound as Ethan rode hard toward the nearest town, the bracelet still burning in his pocket, and the echo of that whisper clinging to his mind. The road was quiet, lined with dead mesquite and dust that clung to his boots, the kind of silence that follows death and waits for truth. By the time he reached Dry Creek, the sun was a dull orange behind the saloon rooftops, and the air smelled of whiskey and old guilt. He dismounted in front of the sheriff's office, his boots hitting the ground with purpose. Inside, Sheriff Dwyer sat behind a worn desk, his hat pulled low, the lines on his face carved deep from years of looking away from things that mattered. When he saw Ethan standing there, something in his eyes flickered, a mix of surprise and fear. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Dwyer muttered, trying to sound casual, but his voice cracked under the weight of it. Ethan didn't answer. He just reached into his coat and placed the bracelet on the desk. The beads caught the morning light, glowing like tiny wounds. The sheriff's hand froze halfway to his coffee cup, the color draining from his face. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the only sound the slow creak of the office clock. Finally, Dwyer exhaled, rubbing his temples. "Where'd you find that?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "On an Apache Girl. Hanging from a tree near San Pedro." The silence after that was heavier than gunfire. Dwyer's eyes dropped to the floor, and when he spoke again, his voice was low, hollow. "You shouldn't have gone out there, Ethan." The words hit harder than he expected. "Tell me what happened," he demanded, his tone sharp. But there was something desperate in it, too, something that begged for meaning. The sheriff leaned back, the chair groaning under his weight. "3 nights ago, a few of the Silver Creek boys went raiding," he said slowly. "Claimed the Apaches were stealing cattle again. I told them to wait for my word, but they didn't listen. They rode out after dark, set fire to a camp north of the ridge." He paused, his eyes glassy. "They didn't find thieves, Ethan. They found families." Ethan felt his chest tighten, his breath catching as the truth crawled closer. "That girl," Dwyer continued, "she wasn't part of the raid. She was the chief's daughter. Came to return something that belonged to a white woman, said it was a token of peace. One of the men took it from her and laughed. Then things got ugly." The sheriff's hands trembled slightly. "By the time I rode out there, it was done. The men swore she attacked first. You know how this town is. They wanted someone to blame." Ethan stared at him, his voice cold when he finally spoke. "That bracelet belonged to my wife." The sheriff looked up, his eyes wet. "I know," he whispered. "She was trying to give it back." For a moment the room seemed to vanish, replaced by the memory of Sarah's smile, the sound of her laughter lost to wind and time. Ethan turned away, his hands shaking. The girl hadn't been a warning. She'd been a messenger. And they killed her for kindness. The morning light broke over the valley, soft and pale, washing the world in silence as Ethan stood once more beneath the old oak. The wind carried the faint scent of rain, and the earth beneath his boots felt alive, waiting. He dug the grave with bare hands until the dirt turned to blood and tears, laying the Apache girl gently into the ground as if she were his own. When it was done, he placed the bracelet on her chest and rested his rifle against the tree, the metal glinting in the dawn. For a long moment he said nothing, only stared at the horizon where the desert met the sky. Then, in a voice cracked with sorrow, he whispered, "White man may not forgive, but I will." The wind answered with a hollow sigh, carrying his words into eternity. Ethan turned toward the mountains, leaving behind his past, his sins, and the ghost of who he once was.